Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be covering MQTT in a more hands-on fashion. It's a topic that we have covered a couple other times. Once we had a dedicated webinar for an introduction to MQTT. And then when we had our Seascape 9.9 Service Pack 3 session, we covered, for a few minutes at least, we covered MQTT because it was new for that version. So today, we're going to get a little more hands-on. Helping me along is going to be my good friend, Marcy Tyree. How are we doing today, Marcy?
I'm great, Chuck. How are you doing?
Fantastic. As I have mentioned, Marcy will answer questions if you have them during the broadcast that she can answer. Otherwise, I'll be answering them at the end. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's take a look at our agenda today. Now, as I have mentioned, this is an attempt at a much more hands-on session than we've had previously. However, several of you may have missed the previous session, so we are going to do a review of MQTT, and we'll try and make it an appropriate level of depth so that those of you who weren't with us before will be able to keep right up, and those who were will be refreshed in your knowledge. So once we go through that review, then we're going to go through a fairly extensive demo of setting up an MQTT system, the type of thing you might do in your lab to try it out. And really, it's the same steps that you would take if you were deploying it for real, really, with some slight differences. But the whole idea is to give you a flavor for the overall setup of the system. Now, because of the limitations with the webinar tools that we have here, all the demonstrations I'm giving you, and they're about 30 minutes worth, were pre-recorded earlier today. So that's really the best way to do that for you. They'll be pre-recorded. So when we get to that portion of the program, I'll be talking to you about how that will work. And as I mentioned before, we'll do questions and answers at the end. Okay, let's start with our review of MQTT. What is MQTT? Stands for Message Queuing Telemetry Transport. Effectively, it is probably the most popular of the new IoT protocols for industrial applications. And it's probably popular for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it utilizes the publisher-subscriber model, which means that it's much more bandwidth efficient than the traditional pull and response approach of something, say, like Modbus TCP. So it's more of a push approach that is, again, much better at utilizing network bandwidth, allowing more devices to share effectively. And it works well whether you're talking about a fast, hardwired, dependable LAN, or you're talking about a less reliable, less bandwidth available cellular type connection. Now, MQTT Spark Plug is really a profile that has been extended or has extended the standard MQTT protocol standard, because the MQTT standard does not define everything in terms of the message communication. It doesn't define all the topic namespace. It doesn't define everything in the payload, those sorts of things. So Sparkplug really looks to go the extra mile in defining those things so that devices can share data effectively. Now, it's only one profile of what in the future will probably be several that we'll be supporting at Horner, but this was by far the most requested. Getting back to the publisher-subscriber model that has made MQTT popular among industrial type folks. What this does is it basically separates the objects that are exchanging data, it separates them from each other, it disconnects them from each other. So when you have Modbus TCP or something like that, or one of our other traditional industrial protocols, the devices that are sharing data with each other are permanently connected. In this publisher-subscriber model of MQTT, the publishers and subscribers, they don't talk to each other directly. Everything goes through the broker, which is also called a server, probably more commonly a server these days, but I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably. But that broker server is really the traffic cop for all network traffic. Publishers who are sharing data are going to publish it to the broker server. Subscribers who are looking to receive data are going to be subscribing them from the broker server. So that broker server is in the middle of all the communications. MQTT is based on TCP/IP almost always. It has encryption capability through TLS. What I demonstrate for you today won't be utilizing encryption just because it's beyond the scope of this particular program, but it is definitely there and definitely recommended for a full-blown installation. And once again, Devices that publish data or subscribe to data or both are also referred to as clients, and sometimes they're referred to as edge of node devices. But I'll mainly be calling them clients today, or just publishers or subscribers. So the first step, if you will, is you need to effectively configure your clients or your edge of network clients. And there's a few things that you need to configure. Each client has to have a unique client ID. This needs to be unique because it has to be something that no other client can report. In the case of the Horner OCS products, again, we're providing all-in-one controllers that support MQTT protocol as a client. We recommend our customers use the MAC address of the OCS unit as the client ID because that's guaranteed to always be unique. Now, also specified on the client side is what's called a group ID. So that's just a logical name that represents how nodes would be grouped or clients would be grouped. So if they're all from the same plant or from the same city, then you might name something like group ID of something like Plant 5 or Indianapolis if they're all from the Indianapolis facility. And then you also specify a node ID, again, a logical name that refers to the specific client that is reporting the data or publishing the data. So, maybe it's on line 3 in a plant, and maybe it would be called line 3 OCS as a node ID. So in addition to specifying a few things, what happens? Well, the client is going to establish a connection with a broker, and to do that, they're going to need login credentials, effectively at least a username and password. That needs to be provided. When a client logs into a broker/server, then they're going to specify whether they want a persistent session or not. And almost always you do want a persistent session, because what that means is if you ever have an interruption to the connection between the client and the broker, then reestablishing that connection will be clean and easy. All the data that was specified on the very first connection will still be there stored in the broker, ready for that communications to be reestablished. Several of the missed messages that were missed during the breakdown in communications will be passed on to the clients at the time of reestablishing of the communications. It's just a good idea to have persistent sessions when you are configuring your clients. Now, also on the client side, you're going to specify a keep alive, because the data that the client is publishing may not be changing very often. So you may just want to send periodically an indication to the broker that, hey, I'm doing well, the connection is active and healthy, I just don't have any new data to report. Because with MQTT, it's very common for a bunch of the topics to be reported on kind of an exception basis or a change of state type basis. And then on the very first connection, when it's established, something called a birth certificate message is sent by the client to the broker, basically conveying that the client's ready to provide real-time data. And then if the connection is ever broken, then that data can be turned into what's called a death certificate. Now, when you're publishing the data, one of the other things that Sparkplug does, and it's part of the MQTT spec, but it kind of expands it, is the data is really organized in a hierarchy. And I talked on a previous slide that you need to specify a group ID and a node ID. There's also an optional device ID, because that edge of device client, like an OCS, could have other devices connected to it on a lower level, and those could be assigned device IDs. And then once you get below that level, then you're at what's called the topic level. So a topic is effectively a simple string which is going to represent that group of data, if you will, and that is configured in the client, and it's configured in the OCS, and we'll show that today. And then within each topic, you have what are known as metrics. Those are really just variables, right? You could have a metric such as oven temperature, air pressure, whatever process data or machine data that needs to be published. Those variables would be reported as metrics that are part of a topic. And then you can see how the hierarchy works there at the bottom. Okay, now when data is published, that is up to the client. In the case of our OCS products, it can be based on time, or it can be based on a trigger or a change of value. Now, there's also something called quality of service. That's an important concept that you need to understand with MQTT. And this is specified by the client. So effectively, just a way to think of it in general is, it is how much handshaking is there going to be for each message that is sent between the client and the broker, and the quality of service level will determine that. So there's three different quality of service levels. There's quality of service level 0, which means that a message is only going to be sent once. There's no guarantee of delivery. It's just fire and forget. So if you're sending process data, let's say a temperature, and you're sending it every few seconds or maybe every couple minutes, then maybe missing a message or two is not a big deal. So in that scenario, maybe quality of service level 0 is perfectly fine. Quality of service level 1 means that the message will be sent at least once. It means there's guaranteed delivery. There's handshaking between the broker and the client. And effectively, the client will keep trying until the data is delivered, or vice versa if it's a message that's initiated from the broker. But it's possible you could have duplicate data. In some applications, that's not a big deal. Like that temperature I was referring to before, that process temperature, something maybe getting a duplicate message of the same process temperature from the same reading, that's probably not a big deal. But if what the data that's being produced by the client is kind of sequencing type information, then possibly getting a duplicate of the data is a bad thing. And in that scenario, then QoS level 2 might be more appropriate. That has the guaranteed delivery without a risk of duplicate data, but it's also the least efficient because it has the most amount of handshaking required. So quality of service is an important concept as well. So some kind of summary on quality of service, you might want to use quality of service 0 if you have a stable connection. You don't mind missing a few messages. Any messages that are missed or lost are not buffered. When comms, those messages, for all intents and purposes, are lost forever. You can use quality of service 1 if every message is important, but duplicates aren't a big deal, and you do want to have the data buffered. And again, use quality of service 2 only if duplicates are a problem, because otherwise quality of service 1 will probably be just fine. And to get back to the buffering, if you have a persistent session that's been specified by a client, and almost always it should be, basically it means that all quality of service level 1 and level 2 messages will be buffered on both the client and the broker side. In the case of the OCS as a client, the current limit for the number of buffered messages is 20. I'm sure we'll increase that in the future. That's the current limit that is set right now. So 20 total messages is what we're currently buffering if there's a loss of communications. Okay, now let's talk about something called a retain flag. This is something that is specified on a per topic basis by the client when they're publishing their topic. And basically what the client is specifying is that this data should be retained, or at least the last good copy of this data, or the last good value of this data should be retained by the broker, so that if any subscribers or any new subscribers choose to subscribe to this topic, they will immediately receive the last good value stored from the broker, even if that value hasn't changed in some time. And then a couple other things in regards to some of these duplicates I talked about with duplicate messages. Packet identifiers are sent every time data is published, which is really important for quality of service 1 and 2. And if there's ever any duplications because of a retransmission, there's also a duplicate flag. Those are probably some details that aren't all that important to most of you. Now, getting to subscribing of data, it's very similar to publishing in a lot of ways. It's totally up to the client as to what they subscribe to. And every client that is acting as a subscriber is going to specify the topic they want to subscribe to, as well as the quality of service level for that topic that does not have to match the quality of service level by which that topic was produced at. So if I've got a client producing a topic and another one or multiple other ones subscribing to that same topic, each client can decide the quality of service level that they want to utilize. So kind of a summary at runtime. Publishers establish a connection with the broker and they start publishing their data. The publisher will publish that data based on an interval. It could be a time interval, it could be change of state, it could be change of value, and that's determined by the client themselves. When they're not publishing data, clients are sending keep alive messages, so the broker knows that the connection is healthy. Meanwhile, you've got subscribers that are subscribing to topics and specifying their own quality of service that they want for that particular topic with the broker. And then as brokers receive published topics from clients, and those same topics are subscribed to by other clients, then that data is passed automatically by the broker. And then if a publisher to broker connection is broken, the broker sends a notification to all the subscribers for those topics so they know that there is a break in communications. Okay, now getting to the OCS implementation of MQTT, a couple notes here. What we are currently supporting is MQTT Spark Plug, and that was added with Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 3. It's supported by all of our mainstream XL series controllers, plus the X5 model, which is part of the micro series, but that's the only micro series controller that supports MQTT. And then the XL Plus and the RCC series, except for the RCC 6512, all those products support MQTT as a client. Now, it is a licensed feature. It works very much like WebMI from a licensing standpoint. A permanent license, though, only costs $50 per OCS, so that's very cost effective. Now, something that's important to know, permanent licenses are currently available for free through the end of the first quarter of this year. So what that means is you can utilize a global voucher number that you can request from Horner, and then you can use that global voucher number to enable and license your OCS units in-house for MQTT for as long as that voucher code is good. And that voucher code is going to be good through the end of the first quarter. So that means that all the units that you license are good forever. It's just that at some point at the end of the first quarter, you're not going to be able to use that same voucher number to license additional units. You'll have to purchase a license for $50 per OCS. So that's the commercial implementation. But $50 per unit is not very expensive, especially when you think about the capabilities for potentially reporting edge of node type data back to the cloud or to a server in the plant or whatever the case may be. Again, the OCS is a edge of network client. It can publish data. All the data that we publish, we can also subscribe to. And we support a fairly significant number of topics and metrics. And remember, metrics are variables. So we can connect with as many as 8 brokers. 1 or 2 is going to be more typical. With each broker, we can publish up to 64 topics, and we can subscribe to 64 topics as well. It's really the same topics. And then you can have as many as 64 variables or metrics per topic. So that's a lot of data that's available there. So it's a pretty good implementation. Now, this is our last slide, really, before we start diving into the demonstration portion of the program today. So this is what I like to call my MQTT cheat sheet slide. So this is a good summary of all the really important concepts of MQTT, especially Sparkplug. Again, the MQTT server broker is the traffic cop for all the messaging. Clients publish topics or subscribe to topics or both. Clients, when they connect to the broker, if they specify a persistent session, which they really should, it makes it really easy to reconnect if communications are interrupted. They won't need to re-specify the topics that they're publishing and subscribing to when they reconnect. And if there are any quality of service 1 or quality of service 2 messages that were buffered, those will be passed on after the connection is reestablished. When clients publish data, they can specify that that data is to be retained by the server/broker. And that means that any new subscribers are immediately going to get their last known value as soon as they subscribe. They don't have to wait for the next change of state or the next broadcast. And then the whole concept of quality of service. Each client specifies the quality of service for each topic that they're either going to publish or the one they want to subscribe to. They don't need to match, of course. Quality of service 0 means we're going to fire the message and forget it. We're not worried about lost messages. They won't be buffered. When they're gone forever. Quality of service 1 means we're going to make sure we have guaranteed delivery of every message, but it's possible we could have duplicates. If duplicates aren't a problem, that's probably what you should use. And then quality of service 2 means that data is going to be transmitted exactly once. So again, you have a guarantee of delivery with no duplicate messages possible. But it's the least efficient and takes the most amount of bandwidth because it's got the most amount of handshaking floating around. Okay, that's our cheat sheet. Okay, so hopefully, for those of you who aren't familiar with MQTT, that was a pretty good introduction to it. And for those who were already familiar with it, hopefully we didn't bore you too much, but we got you re-familiar with things. For the last portion of our program today, and it's going to be about 30 or 35 minutes, we're going to literally show you how to set up a complete system from licensing your OCS unit, setting up a broker. In this case, we're going to set up an open source broker called Mosquitto. There are commercially available brokers that you can purchase. with full support and that sort of thing. Those are also available, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to show you one that is very popular, even though it's open source. And then we're going to show you how to set up an OCS as a publisher subscriber client. And then we're going to show at runtime an OCS connecting to the broker, both in the local facility, and also we're going to show one connecting from a remote location. And then we're also going to show at the end, we're going to show a freely available software client and how you can use that to kind of test and monitor the system. So the way we're going to do this is I've got about 5 videos or so. I'm going to be showing a video for each part of the demonstration. It was just recorded this morning. It's just that for this particular software package that we use for the webinar system, it doesn't do well with cameras and things. So we tend to pre-record our demonstrations. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And remember, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to type them in now, and then we will answer them at the end. Okay, I have a unit here that I want to license for MQTT. Now, there's a couple things I'm going to need when I license a unit. First thing I'm going to need is a memory card. Now, that memory card, and I'm talking about micro SD here, it does not have to stay in the unit, but it needs to be in there while we license it, because that's the media by which the license is transferred into the unit. Secondly, I'm going to need to know the MAC address of the unit. I'm going to get that from the system menu. That's probably the easiest way to get that. Let me go ahead and go to Networks, LAN Settings. Now, the MAC address is what's used whenever you're licensing an OCS for anything, whether that's WebMI or MQTT or something else. It is the unique identifier for each OCS, and as you can see, it's right there, and I'll go ahead and write that down now. Okay, there's a couple different ways to license units for features, and I'm going to be showing you what we call the manual method. Now, this is a method that's really useful when you have a unit, let's say, that's out in the field, and you decide after it's in the field that you want to add one of these license features to it, let's say WebMI or MQTT, it really doesn't matter. So effectively, in this manual method, you just go straight to our licensing website, and that's licensing.hornerautomation.com, and it'll ask you to log in. Now, at Horner, all logins for all of our websites, whether it's our licensing site, our hornerautomation.com website, or even the European site at hornerautomation.eu, if you've got a login for one of these, it's the same login for all of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in with my standard credentials. The first thing I'm going to want to do is select the license that I'm looking to apply. So I'm going to go ahead here with MQTT licensing. That's what I'm going to select there. Okay, and it's asking me to plug in the MAC address. And you notice that the first 3 digits of the MAC address are the same, because that's true for all controllers. So it's really just asking me for the last 3 values here. And in my case, that is 04 C3 A5. All right, so now it's asking for a voucher code. Now, for the next several months, we're going to be providing a universal voucher code that you can use to license any OCS permanently for this trial period. Now, you won't have to relicense the unit later, but at some point, this universal code will stop working. But I'm going to go ahead and paste that in now. And everything looks good. I'll accept the terms and conditions and hit Redeem Voucher. All right, it has been successfully generated. All right, you'll notice down here in my browser, you can find in the lower left-hand corner here, a license file has been downloaded. So that's the file that we're going to want to effectively get to the microSD memory card and get into our unit that's going to be licensed. So let's take a look at that now. Okay, I've closed my browser, and this is the license file that was downloaded from the licensing site. You can see it's got a fairly long name here. Now, my next step is to rename this file, load it on my memory card, and install it in the OCS. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate it or make a copy of it that I can archive for safekeeping. Okay, now what I want to name this file is MQTT firmware.lic. All right, now I'm going to take this file, put it on my memory card, and install it in my OCS. Okay, I've installed the memory card in my controller. We'll take a look and see that there's that file that I put on there, the licensing file. Now all we have to do is a power cycle, and the unit will be fully licensed. After that point, we can remove the memory card without any issue. We'll go back to the system menu. We'll check the licensing details and see there at the bottom, MQTT license, yes. Okay, so that's the first video where we showed you how to license an OCS. And that's just one way to do it. There's more automatic ways to license than that manual method, but I thought that would be good to show you folks because we've never really shown that method before. Okay, so the next thing we're going to show is the setup of the broker. And the broker we're going to set up is called Mosquitto. All right, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you the steps that I took to install Mosquitto. As I just mentioned, Mosquitto is an open source MQTT broker/server. That's really a good option in terms of getting familiar with MQTT, setting it up and working with it a bit. So that's why I want to show that to you today. So you can find the Mosquitto download at mosquitto.org/download. And effectively, in my case, I have an ancient copy of Windows 7, but it is 64-bit. So this was the download that I went ahead and downloaded, or the install that I went ahead and downloaded. And here it is right here. Okay, so when you install that, the default install location is under Program Files, Mosquitto. So there's a Mosquitto folder, which I'll show you here. Okay, so these are pretty much all the standard files that were included in this folder after I went ahead and did the install. Now, one of the things that happens when Mosquitto does the standard install these days, and this is version 2.0.5, which is the latest I could find. One of the things that Mosquitto does when it installs is it installs Mosquitto as a service. And when I'm playing around with something, a program that I want to be able to stop and start and those sorts of things, I typically don't like to have it installed as a service, at least not one that's automatically going to run every time I boot up. So I'm going here to the task manager under services, scrolling down to find Mosquitto. There we go. And you'll see that the status is stopped. So it automatically was set to run, and that's not what I wanted. So I went in here under Mosquitto broker, and I changed the startup type, which was automatic after the install, to manual. And that way I can just start Mosquitto and stop Mosquitto when I want. I don't have to, worry about it being running in the background when I'm not interested in it. Now, if this was a permanent installation, then that would probably be a different scenario. But for me, in this case, I didn't want it to start up on its own. Okay, the next thing I did was I got a little bit of advice from my engineering team that suggested that I create a batch file that would allow me to get a lot of extra diagnostic information whenever I load up and run Mosquitto. So they provided this batch file to me, which is really going to help with troubleshooting for sure. If you start it up and you're having difficulty with a setting or having difficulty getting it to run the way you want, then again, selecting these options. In this case, it's when you load it, you're loading it with the -C and the -B option. Now keep in mind, we're not talking about an advanced user interface here. We're really just talking about a command line interface. So I've got a batch file here that's been created so that when I do run Mosquitto, I'll get some extra information. The next thing I did is you need to go in and adjust some settings. Now, Mosquitto comes with what's called a conf, C-O-N-F file, or configuration file, mosquitto.conf. So here it is. I'm going to go ahead and open this with my text editor. Okay, and this is actually a pretty sizable configuration file. And what's interesting about this configuration file, by default, everything is commented out. So it's kind of neat how they did this. So you can effectively go through and uncomment out, if you will, any of the configuration that you want to set that's other than the default. So that's the mosquitto.conf file. Now, to try and make this relatively straightforward to kind of show you the settings that I changed, I've got here a reduced version of the conf file that I can show you that just really indicates the things that I changed in the default configuration. And I'll explain why I changed them as we go here. So the first thing that you really should change in the general configuration section is what's called the per listener settings. And those really should be set to true. The default is that all the login credentials for every client out there who attempts to log in to the Mosquitto broker/server is going to have the same set of login credentials. Now, that's obviously not what you want, right? I mean, you can do it for testing purposes or demo purposes, but it's a pretty basic thing that you're going to want to change. So I changed this to per listener settings true so that everybody who logs in, okay, every client that logs in is going to have their own unique set of login credentials. Okay, so that was the first thing I changed. Now in the listener section, I changed the port number from 1883 to 1993. The standard port number for MQTT is 1883. There's no reason that shouldn't have worked, except for after a Windows update, for whatever reason, my port 1883 stopped working, and I hadn't had a chance to troubleshoot that before I prepared for this webinar session. So as a shortcut, I just changed the port number for MQTT from the standard of 1883 to 1990. So that's something that hopefully you wouldn't have to do, but I had to do it just in the interest of time, really. Okay, there's also some logging settings that you can add to some of the default things that are logged in terms of, errors, warnings, notices, etc. So I went ahead and selected those options by just taking away the comment character here. And then the last thing I did, the last couple things I did. First, in the security area, I set allow anonymous to false. So what that does is it makes sure that if an anonymous client attempts to log in to the broker/server, it won't be allowed. It'll be denied. So you obviously don't want anonymous clients able to log in. You want to be in control of all that. And then the last thing that has to do with the authentication and topic access control was I went ahead and specified the password file, or a password file to use for Mosquitto when it runs. So I'm going to end up creating this file, which is going to contain a hashed version of all the login credentials for all the clients that are going to be logging into the Mosquitto server. And I'll show you that process here now. Okay, so the first thing I did in the process of creating a password file is I created just a new text file named passwordfile.pwd.text. Okay, so this is just a brand new text file. And I'll go ahead and open it here so you can see it. Obviously, if this was a real application, I wouldn't be showing a bunch of webinar attendees the login credentials for a series of MQTT clients. But I want you to see what this file looks like. It's really quite simple. Effectively, you simply put the username and password separated by a colon on each line for whatever clients that you're expecting. Now, there are other ways of doing this, but this is just the way I did. That's a good way of doing it when you're kind of getting familiar with Mosquitto. So as you can see here, I've created credentials for 5 different clients to be able to log in. And this is just a text file that's wide open at this stage, as you can see. Okay, so I've got this text file. I'm going to go ahead and open up a command prompt. And I'm going to navigate to my desktop in this case, because that's where this file is located. And I'll go ahead and do a directory here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename the file from passwordfile.pwd.text to just passwordfile.pwd. Okay, so I started with a text file, just in plain text with the username and passwords that I needed. I saved it as a text file, renamed it to the file name that I wanted, but it's still just a file. It's not a Mosquitto password file. So I have to execute a command to actually turn it into a password file. And at the same time, that will also take the passwords and encrypt them. Get rid of the caps lock there. Mosquitto _ password -u, and then the name of the file, which is passwordfile.pwd. So as soon as I execute this command, the password file will be created, and then I'll be good to go. Now, I'm not actually going to execute this command because I'm in the wrong directory. I would do it from the Mosquitto folder instead, but I'm not in that directory right now. Okay, we've created our password file. So let's go see what it looks like. So let's find the password file here, passwordfile.pwd. I'll go ahead and open it with my text editor. And as you can see, the passwords have been hashed. The usernames were not hashed, but the passwords have all been hashed. So now, it's not quite as vulnerable as it was before when it was sitting on your desktop. So at this stage, that's pretty much all the steps that I took to set up Mosquitto. So let's go ahead and start it. So I'm going to go down here and find my batch file. All right, and I will run that as an administrator. And there we go. Okay, it's executing, and those are those kind of verbose settings exposed here, showing that version 2.05 is starting. The configuration has been loaded from mosquitto.conf. We're opening the ports on 1993. Remember, I told you I chose to use 1993 because I was having some trouble on my own PC with 1883. And away we go. So everything's up and running. So the next time we see anything in this window, it's going to be because a client has logged in or attempted to log in, and then we should get some status there as well. Okay, so that was the process of setting up the broker. We've already licensed our OCS. Now we need to go ahead and configure it to be a client. So that will be the next step. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is setting up one of our controllers as a MQTT client to publish data to the broker/server that we just set up. So I will go into Program, Messaging, and then MQTT. All right, we've shown you this before on other webinars, but it bears a review again. So in the first tab, we need to select our profile. There's currently only Sparkplug, so that's an easy choice. Under controller, there are several fields we need to fill in. So we need to assign a status register. And again, this happens to be a project which has been set up with the traditional register-based setup. It works perfectly fine with tag-based and IEC as well. But anyway, we've set up a status register, which is actually not one register, but a series of 26 words, which gives us information such as the health of the connection, as well as statistics on how many messages we've published and how many messages have come back, etc. There's an enable bit that must be turned on in order for an MQTT connection to be attempted with a broker. Every MQTT client must have a unique client ID. And we just make it really easy to make sure that's a unique ID by allowing customers to use the MAC address, because those are guaranteed to be unique. So that's a recommendation there. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to use that. You could use just any ASCII field, but again, it needs to be unique. The namespace is fixed. That's part of the specification. And then we have what's called a group ID and a node ID. So the group ID should be assigned by you, the configurer, to something that is a logical, I guess, group of nodes. In my case, I'm at my home office in Brownsburg, Indiana, so I've named the group ID Brownsburg. And then node ID, I have named that pump control as the accurate identifier of what this specific node is doing. So that's the controller tab. Now, from here, you can also press this button if you choose and validate the license for MQTT in your controller. I showed you how to license the unit manually earlier, so we won't go ahead and do that. We'll just skip that for now. All right, let's move to the broker connection. This is more or less the login settings for the broker. So let's take a close look here. So what's the name of the connection? Really, you can call it anything you like. In this case, I've named it HQ Broker. What's the IP address we're going to use to log into this broker? Now, in my case, the broker is in my home office, so I've got an internal IP address here. That could also be an external IP address. It could be a URL. It could be variables or registers where I can program that in later, so it doesn't have to be hard-coded. But I've just chosen to keep it simple and hard-code in the IP address of the broker, which happens to be inside this same facility. The port number by default is 1883. That's the default MQTT port number. I had to switch to 1993 because of an operating system issue I haven't had time to debug. So I just switched it to 1993, which Windows was happy with for now. And then these are my username and password credentials that I've been assigned by the broker. So if you remember that process where I created that password file, inside that password file was a username and password combination that I went ahead and put in here. A keep alive is specifying that how often in seconds am I going to, I guess, effectively send a message to the server to let them know that I'm still alive and happy. You know, this can be an integer up to 65,000 seconds. So it can be rather lengthy. You don't have to ping every 30 seconds. You can do it much less than that. The clean session flag is, if you remember from our cheat sheet, basically says that if you have that checked, then you are going to have to re-log in as a client. You're going to have to re-log into all of your published and subscribed topics every time you reconnect to a server/broker. If it's not a clean session, then you have the ability just to reconnect quickly, and it's really the recommended setting almost always. Okay, so these are the settings for the broker login. Now, in a real application, you're certainly going to want to incorporate encryption. You're going to want to do that. It's really beyond the scope of what I can cover in a 1-hour webinar, but keep your eye open on our website for either white papers or combination of videos that are dedicated to setting up the encryption on an MQTT application. So that'll be coming in the future. Although the capability is there today, I'm just not going to show it to you today. So that's the broker login. And then we get to the configuration of the topics. This is where we configure the data that we're going to publish. And in the case of the Spark plug, all the data that we publish also we're technically subscribed to as well. So in this case, I've named the topic edge data, and then I've assigned only one metric in this case, one variable called data in out that is tied to register 101 as an integer. So I'm really only pushing one integer variable, again, in the topic name of edge data / data in data out, or data in / out. So that's the data that I'm publishing. And then here I configure how often I'm going to publish it. And I have decided on change of state. So every time that this particular bit variable changes state from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, then I will go ahead and broadcast the status of data in _ out. Really the entire topic, which just happens to be one metric inside. Okay, so that's the configuration of the MQTT client. Let's go ahead and move on to a runtime operation of an OCS that's in the same facility. Okay, now that we've created our program in Cscape to configure the client, in this case an EXL6, let's take a look at what we have running in here on the screen. Okay, so first of all, we have a page where we can set up our LAN configuration. Of course, everything these are all internal IP addresses, net masks, etc. Back to the MQTT screen. If you remember from our configuration, we had a single metric which we were publishing called data in - out. And we had a enable bit to enable MQTT log into the broker and active communications. We have a send bit, which effectively is the trigger. Every time this turns on or off, we will broadcast this value data in - out. I didn't go to the trouble of writing any logic to detect a change of state and automatically toggle that bit. I could have for sure. These 4 lights here are indications of 4 bits inside of the status variable or status register. The first one tells us we have that our MQTT engine is up and running, and that one should always be there. The config light means that we have a valid MQTT configuration. That's important. Of course, the license light will be on. Now, the first time after you download a new program, that license light will be off, but as soon as you make a connection or attempt to make a connection to the actual broker, then that'll turn on again. And then there's a connection light that shows that we have an active connection with a broker / server. And then down here, more status information, how many messages we've published, how many subscribed, etc. Okay, let's go ahead and go online. All right, so I've also got a shot there of the computer showing what's happening with the broker itself. So I'm going to go ahead and go online. You can see the broker is indicating that we've logged in and the topics that we have effectively published. All right, and every time that let's just put in the same value again, that's smart. Every time that I toggle this change of state bit, I'm going to broadcast a new value. And I'll do that again. All right, and you see the value coming into the broker / server. All right, so that's a quick run through of this demo application and the client logging into the broker and publishing data. This time we're going to look at, and I apologize, the video quality isn't quite as good this time. Little focus issues on the remote unit, but this time we're going to show you an OCS that is logging in via MQTT to the broker, but from outside the facility. All right, so another thing we wanted to show you folks was we wanted to show kind of remote login. And we have Casey Gardner, one of our application engineers, back at the factory. I'm working remote today in my home office. And we've got the Mosquitto server running. And Casey's going to go ahead and go online with his XL4 that's acting as a client. So go ahead and go online first, Casey. Okay, there we go. As you can see, there's a little bit of a delay with the video, actually, more than the time it took for the login to occur. So as you can see on the screen there, he's all logged in, and then he's set up so that effectively every time he changes data it should be broadcast. So go ahead and change some data on there. And you can send it again. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so as you can see, it's really lightning fast. I mean, actually, the message is coming quicker than the video does here on Teams. Anyway, and really all we had to do to enable that to happen is I had to make sure that the MQTT port incoming here in my home office was available. And normally that would be 1883, which was working last week for Casey and I, but after my Windows update, we had to switch to 1993. All right, well, thank you, Casey, for showing us that remotely, and you have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
No problem, you too.
All right, so that was basically showing you that it's just as easy for a client to report data really no matter where they're located as long as they have a communications connection. In this case, you know, it was sent in over the internet. So the last video or demo I'm going to show you is a really useful free software tool that's available that is not only an MQTT client that you can use for troubleshooting and debugging and those sorts of things, but it's also Sparkplug aware, so it can fully decode the payload of the MQTT Sparkplug messages. So we'll look at that one next. Okay, next I want to show you another piece of free software that is a little more sophisticated from a user interface standpoint, at least, than the user interface that we're finding on the Mosquitto broker. So this is a client, actually, a piece of software that acts as an MQTT client, and it is Sparkplug aware. So it has the ability to decode the Sparkplug payload that are part of the MQTT message. A generic MQTT client can certainly interpret the data properly everywhere except for the payload. So you'll see topics, etc., but you won't necessarily see all the details in all the metrics. But MQTT FX is a software package that works with, it works in Mac and Windows. It's available in a variety of different forms. Okay, so let's take a look here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the login looks like here for the broker that we want to log into, which is the Mosquitto broker, the same one that the OCS has been logging into. We have to be a client ID. Again, I had to change the broker port over to 1993. We've got all the login information here. The user credentials, again, these user credentials are contained within that password.pwd file that I created earlier in the presentation. We're not using SSL so far in a real application. We certainly would want to. But in general, this is the configuration we've got here for this piece of client software. So we can go ahead and connect to the broker/server, and we are connected. And then let's go ahead and snoop, because the software package does let you do that. Let's go ahead and snoop for topics that are out there. Okay, well, look, what we found here, this is the topic that my OCS is broadcasting. Okay, so we can go ahead, select that, right-click, and hit subscribe. So now we've become a subscriber to this data. Now look what happened immediately. Immediately, what did we get? We immediately got a copy of the topic, and it's marked as retained. What does that mean? Well, remember, retained means that as soon as a subscriber subscribes to a topic, they get the last copy or the last known value, last good value. So that's what that is. Now, if I continue to send data here, additional transitions, all right, you see those showing up here as well. Because it is Sparkplug aware, we do have the ability using the Sparkplug decoder here to see the details within the message. You can see actually it's showing me that the value that I was broadcasting there was a value of 88. And I didn't bother to change it as I did multiple transmissions. It's 88 all the way through. Now I can also publish with this software package. I can do that as well. I'm not going to show that right now. But anyway, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to see probably what I've seen so far, probably the best freely available MQTT Sparkplug Aware client software that's out there today. Again, very useful when you're learning MQTT and working with it. Okay, so hopefully those demonstrations were useful. Now, there were plenty of things that I didn't show you, but we're already an hour in, so you can understand that we're limited in what we can show in any one session. So we didn't show any kind of encryption. We didn't demonstrate doing anything with the data that was sent between the clients through the broker/server. So there's a lot we didn't show, but hopefully you got a good flavor for what is the process, if you will, for setting up a system, setting up a broker, that sort of thing. And I do also want to reiterate, not every broker is going to be set up like Mosquitto, which is an open source command line type interface. There are certainly more polished commercially available products, but of course, those need to be paid for. They're not just open source. Okay, let's see if we have any questions here. Okay, is your mockup using release Seascape and firmware, so we should be able to repeat? Absolutely, it is, no question. Now, some of you may have noticed that 15.40 firmware, which had been on the website, was briefly or has been briefly pulled off. If you do want to test this and you don't currently have a unit with 15.4 already installed, let us know in tech support and we'll get you a copy of that firmware. We did have a problem with that firmware. We will be sending an announcement on that shortly, but certainly if you need to test that, we'll be able to get that to you quickly. So I apologize for that bit of inconvenience for sure. I assume the webinar will be recorded so I can share this later with my team. Absolutely. We always post our webinars on our website. And then lately, Marcy has also been posting them on our YouTube channel. So you can get them either place. And if you go to the resources area of our website, that's where we typically have our videos, including our webinars. Can you please email me the global voucher number? Certainly, there are, I figured, plenty of you who would love to work with this feature with your own units that you've got in your hands. I'm sure you would love a copy of that voucher number. We'll be more than happy to send that to anybody who wants it. So the standard procedure would be to just make a request from your regional sales guy, your tech support department, anybody who works for Horner. We can make sure we get you a copy of that global voucher code. A comment from Donnie. He said that Mosquitto is very popular because it's open source. Absolutely. Or maybe he was talking about MQTT being popular because it's open source. Both are true. They're open standards, open source, and very popular. This is a question from David Gartner asking about the limitation in Seascape. I mentioned earlier that when you have an interruption in communications between a client and the broker/server, that if it's quality of service 1 or quality of service 2 type messaging, that there will be buffering that occurs during the communications interruption. And that on the client side for an OCS, we're currently limited to 20 messages total that we can buffer. So his question was, after 20 buffered messages, the 21st message lost, or is it the most 20 recent messages? That's a great question. The answer to that is currently the first 20 messages are retained and all messages after that are lost. So I'm sure that's an area where we will update our MQTT driver to probably do a little more buffering, and we may even look at making it a circular buffer. We've had some requests come in from specific customers, and I'm sure, going to honor those requests, again, as we always are trying to make our products better. Here's a question or a comment that came in. I noticed that during the licensing portion of the program that you have a J1939 licensing section on the website. So that is true. So up until now, the only way that you could get support for J1939 automotive type protocol would be to either A, order a single CAN port model, those that are 6 inches or smaller, like the EXL6 or EXLW or XL4. If you want J1939 in our single CAN versions, you have to order a J1939 version of that. Well, that's been the case until now. We're now able to allow customers to take a standard XL4 or a standard EXL6 and license those in the field, just like they would WebMI. So you pay for a voucher, and then you can turn your standard single port XL4 into a J939 capable XL4. So that's a procedural change that we've made to try and make it a little more convenient for customers. May we use the same license for all the OCSs we already have? So I think I understand the question. Basically, the global voucher number that we're making available until the end of this quarter, that will work in any of the OCSs that you have that support MQTT. So that same one voucher number. If you've got a dozen OCSs in your possession that you'd like to go ahead and license for MQTT, you can use that same voucher number with all of those. They'll be permanently licensed in 6 months or sometime after the end of the first quarter. If you decide you want to license some more units, well, at that point, you'll need to purchase a voucher for the massively huge total of $50 to license your units after that. So hopefully that was the question you were asking. Is it possible to purchase a unit with a license pre-installed? At this point, no. We aren't currently making them available that way, but that's a possibility for maybe for OEMs that order customized units. We have customers today that order units with custom overlays and things. It could be something that we could work out with an OEM arrangement like that, but the standard is that the license is added in the field. A comment from Donnie talking about just use Linux. Not sure what that's about, but just so you know, I mean, I think some of you probably already have figured it out. You can use, if you're talking about Mosquitto, and he's probably referring to my complaints about port 1883 suddenly becoming unavailable. He's probably saying, hey, knucklehead, if you use Linux, you wouldn't have to deal with that. And he's probably right. So, but for me, it was quicker and easier to set it up in Windows despite the lack of a port. But Mosquitto is available for Linux for sure, as is, I believe, that MQTT FX program that I showed at the end there. That's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, I believe. So yeah, so a lot of people will set up brokers and servers using Linux and just avoid the whole Windows and Mac thing altogether. On the MQTT configuration in the OCS, can the client ID, group ID, and node ID be done by tags or registers instead of fixed text? So currently they cannot, to my knowledge. I don't believe they can. I'll go back and double check that, but I'm pretty sure they can't. So he's asking for that as a future request so that you don't have to make a change in Cscape to make a change to those parameters. So that's probably a good idea. That's probably a feature request that we should add. I'm pretty sure that that's not there today. And he mentioned that it should go up beyond strictly the client ID, group ID, and node ID to include other entries that are currently hard-coded. So that's a good suggestion. Let's see, how does the keep alive relate to the heartbeat and the death certificate? So I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. I guess that's an answer I don't have at again, I don't have the answer to that on the top of my head. I'll have to look that one up in terms of exactly the precise relationship between the keep alive, the heartbeat, and the death certificate. I'll get back with you on that one, Mark. Apologize, I didn't have that answer for you on the top of my head. Okay, have a question. Will the sample program utilized here be available? Sure, we can make that available. That wouldn't be a problem. So if those of you who are interested in either the global voucher code for MQTT or the example program or both, feel free to request those, and we'll be more than happy to provide them for sure. What is the payload message format that is pushed out to the MQTT broker? So in the case of Sparkplug, that is specified in a Google format. It's a standardized format, but it's a Google format. So there is a full specification available online for the Sparkplug specification. So you can find that very easily by Googling Sparkplug spec, and you'll find that document online, and it will go into great detail as to the payload format, and it does follow a standardized Google type format. Can you provide a URL or the name of the Sparkplug Aware client that I demonstrated? Sure, it was called MQTT FX. MQTT FX. I don't have a URL for that, but that was the name of it. I'm sure if you Google that, you'll find it. It was, it's pretty much universally regarded, at least among Sparkplug users, as a really effective piece of freeware that has been developed and is out there. Okay, lots of great questions today. We went pretty long, hour and 15 minutes, and I really appreciate you folks for hanging in there with us. We tried to provide a little bit more of a hands-on type approach here, and it does mean kind of pre-recording the demo so that we can get cameras and things and make it work better. So thanks for putting up with a little bit of glitches in between the sections of the demo. We have not yet announced our webinar for next month, but we will be shortly. And again, we appreciate your attendance, and feel free anytime to request a specific topic, whether it's for our webinars or whether it's for the YouTube live streams that we've been doing lately. We love to get new topics and to get more content out there that you're interested in. And again, we really appreciate your attendance and your interest. And everybody just have a really great day and stay safe out there.